So suppose a journalist or a politician who addresses another politician saying, you obtained insufficient results on the problem of taxation burdens, or you lied on the problem of taxation burdens. These are two examples of attack against, respectively, a politician's leadership or a politician's morality. So what are the effects of these attacks? And can the politicians effectively reply to them? For some time now, we have been studying how citizens' perceptions of politicians is influenced by what is said about politicians and what politicians say. I would say that although we know a lot about the two fundamental dimensions in impression formation, we know much less about how communication influences such impression formation. And I think the political domain is especially apt to study this issue because a lot of information we have regarding politicians is not a first-hand information or first-hand knowledge. Our perception is likely to be very much influenced by media communication. So we started our research investigating actual debates, real-world politics, especially attacks against politicians and politicians' defenses. And then we developed a series of experimental studies in which we manipulate the content and the style of these attacks and defenses. And we study the effects on the perception of politicians' different personality dimension. Let me say, as regards exactly the personality dimensions of politicians, that several disciplines and research traditions have been interested in the study of politicians' personality traits, and I would say these research traditions often do not overcross very much. They have developed in parallel somehow. And I'm referring, for instance, to the political science and sociology approach, such as this American national election studies and other studies on representative samples of voters, or personality studies approach using the Big Five model, or also the social psychological approach with the two dimensions, agency competence and morality communion, especially studies by Bogdan, Wojcicka and collaborators. Although they are different, I would say there is some agreement regarding what are the relevant dimensions in the perception of political leaders. And even if some studies like the Big Five model, they use more dimensions, then in the end, factorial analysis lead them to two main dimensions that correspond to the agency and communion, or agency competence and communion warmth dimensions. Although I would say within the political field, sometimes, we usually find that in our studies, some traits are more relevant than others. So as you can see on the left, within the agency dimension, the leadership traits, that is, traits like decided, resolved, tenacious, dynamic, seem to have more relevance. And in the communion or warmth dimension, the morality traits seem to be especially relevant: honest, loyal, reliable, sincere. So, but we might wonder something else, that is, what sub-dimension matters more in the perception of politicians. So if we go back here to social psychological research, and Andrea already told us about that this morning, we have some data from social psychological research showing a sort of supremacy of morality in the evaluation of others. Previous research showed that morality is generally more relevant in the evaluation of others, and we have first of all an asymmetry of negative information, that is, negative information about morality is more diagnostic than negative information about competence. And a second asymmetry, which has also been shown, is an asymmetry in in-group favoritism. that is, morality is perceived as more relevant in the identification with one's group and its members. So these asymmetries lead me to our research questions. There are three mainly. The first one has to do with the asymmetry of negative information. Do attacks against morality affect citizens' evaluations of the politician more than attacks against leadership? This is the first question. The second one is, do voters overrate the morality of politicians with their same ideology and defend their morality when it is attacked? And this would be an asymmetry in in-group favoritism. And as a matter of fact, recently we have been wondering whether there is sort of a third asymmetry, namely, are there differences in defending morality versus leadership? That is, are some defense strategies more effective to defend morality than leadership? So going to the first question, the effects of political attacks, let me say that, generally speaking, what we can say, are the attacks effective? I would answer yes and no. On the yes side, we know that people devote more attention to negative information about people in general and to candidates also. So a negativity effect. From this point of view, attacks should be effective. But we also know that on the other side, attacks can also not be effective because of a backlash or a boomerang effect. That is, attacks on a candidate might have more negative consequences on the source than on their target. So, in our studies, we started by investigating direct attacks against leadership or morality of candidates. What we do? Well, we ask participants to read a brief interview by a journalist. At the end of the interview, the journalist attacks either the politician's leadership or the politician's morality. So let me first show you the results regarding direct attacks against the two dimensions, because we did not expect that direct attacks would be so effective because of a boomerang or backlash effect against the source. So let us see what happens. And you can see here examples of these direct attacks against the politician's leadership or morality. One more relevant factor is that we tell participants that the politician is either a left-wing, in a between subject condition, either a left-wing or a right-wing politician. So we manipulate ideology too. What we find here is, well, first of all, what also other studies found, that morality is perceived, generally speaking, perceived as weaker than leadership, so is a weaker dimension in politicians' personality. And also, there are some studies which say that left-wing citizens give more relevance to politicians' morality, while right-wing citizens attribute more relevance to the politicians' leadership. So we checked this, and what we find is actually no main effect of either a participant or politician alleged ideology, but we find a two-way interaction, very clear, that shows the presence of a clear and evident in-group favoritism. So people evaluate the politicians who allegedly is on their side better. But if we also see is this in-group favoritism asymmetric, as we said before? Well, it is. There is an asymmetry in this in-group favoritism, because if you take a look here, you see that the difference in perceived morality is much stronger. That is, you perceive the politician on your own side more moral than the politician on the other side, whereas the evaluations of perceived leadership is not that different. So there is an asymmetry. But these attacks were not effective. I mean, they didn't lead to a different effect, and they were direct attacks. So let me go now to another way, another attack style, that is an indirect attack style. Can indirect attacks be more convincing, and perhaps be more convincing on one dimension than the others? What kind of direct attacks, a direct attack we used? Obviously, you can choose many different kind of direct attacks. In this case, we use what we call the counterfactual attacks. As you know, a counterfactual is a mental simulation where an antecedent of a real event is mutated so as to produce a different outcome. And what is relevant is that the target of the counterfactual is often perceived as responsible of the negative event. So we can consider a counterfactual as, and we can use a counterfactual as a form of attack against others. As you see in this example, if you had intervened firmly on the fiscal problem, our country would be in a better condition today, an attack against the politicians' leadership. Or if you had acted correctly on the fiscal problem, same, our country would be in a better condition today, and this is an attack against the politicians' morality. So what happens here? We still find a main effect of ideology. That is, the in-group politician is evaluated better than the out-group politician. But we also find a two-way interaction between attack style and attack dimension. And as you can see, we see that the most effective attack is the indirect attack against the politician morality. So after an indirect attack against the politician morality, the evaluation of the politician was worse than after the other three attacks. And what is relevant is that ideology is not there. I mean, there is no three-way interaction. That is, this kind of attack is so effective as to reduce in-group favoritism regarding politicians' morality, because ideology was not in interaction with the other two dimensions. We also ask people to evaluate the attack, that is the journalist's attack, that is to say, well, is this attack effective? And here, as you can see, we find the same results, just in an opposite direction. That is, the indirect attack against the politician morality is evaluated as more effective, and indeed it is, than the other three types of attack. So, a further development of our research, I don't know about the times, okay, regards the third question. So far we realized that an indirect attack against morality may be effective, so as to reduce also the in-group favoritism regarding the politician's morality. A further development of the research, which is very recent, but I would like to mention it here, regards replies. Is it possible to restore either morality or leadership after being attacked? And if so, how? The effectiveness of defensive strategies used by politicians is very much debated. And again, we already have some data showing that a too direct defense may be, again, not very effective. People may not appreciate that very much. Whereas if you defend yourself in a more indirect way, maybe people may follow you a little bit more, but let's see whether this happens. So in this case, because we are carrying out some studies on this, we wondered whether there are differences according not only to the kind of defense, but also to the kind of personality dimensions you are defending. And, we are carrying out a series of studies on that, but I wanted to show just one of them to give you an idea of how it works. And that is, we investigated the effect of a specific indirect defense strategy, what we call the downward counterfactuals. Let me go back very briefly again to these counterfactuals. We noticed also in the analysis of actual political discourse that politicians sometimes say things like, yes, things are not good, but they could have been worse. If I hadn't done this and made this decision and so on, things would have been even worse. So a downward comparison. You imagine a worse outcome, or obviously, but this would not be a defense, you can also imagine a better world. In this case, you say, well, you admit that you didn't act very effectively. So, a downward counterfactual comparison might be a form of effective justification. So let me show you some examples of a comparison of these different kind of defenses. In this case, you see the first examples regards what we can call, as I told you, a form of justification. So you say, well, yes, it's true, but if I had been less honest about my connections, the council budget would have suffered a greater loss. Sorry, I didn't tell you that this specific study was carried out with Karen Douglas and Robbie Sutton at the University of Kent, and it is a different, material than the previous one. This is a newspaper article. The politician has been attacked. So we present participants with this attack. We evaluate the leadership and morality of the politician. Then participants read the defense of the politician. The politicians writes a letter to the newspaper defending himself or herself, and then we assess again the politician's leadership and morality to see whether the defense was effective or not. The second one is not a real defense, it's a sort of concession, we would say. You admit that things were not good. If I had been more honest about my connections, the council budget wouldn't have suffered such a loss. And the third one is a control condition. I would say it is a sort of a negation. You don't want to speak about your morality or leadership. You say, despite the fact that I've been honest about my connections, the council budget suffered a loss. So what happens here? What we find is that maybe there is a third asymmetry. There is again an asymmetry. That is, some defenses are more effective for a specific dimension. That is, what you can see here. We see that the downward counterfactual defense, so the only real defense, you say things might have been worse, so I'm not that bad. The downward counterfactual defense is very effective, both for the leadership and for the morality dimension. But when you think about and you say that things, yes, could have been better than they are, then you admit that you were not that good. This is very effective for defending your morality, but it's not effective for defending your leadership dimension. And the control condition is in between, as you say. Maybe we will have time to discuss about it. We are thinking about why this happens. And one possibility is that the downward counterfactual defense is a real defense, it's a sort of a short-term defense. So you restore your leadership, perhaps partially your morality also. But when you say, yes, but I could have been better, perhaps people appreciate the fact that you think, yes, I want to change in the future, so something more long-term oriented. But, okay, this is something we are thinking about because there is still some research to do to disentangle this. But what we found, anyhow, it is an asymmetry also in the effects of the defense. So getting to the conclusion, I don't know if I'm okay. I would say three main points, focusing on morality mainly. Well, we have seen that morality is the most critical dimension in the evaluation of politicians, because we saw that it is generally lower in the evaluation of politicians. Also, I didn't show you the data, but we constantly find that it has a stronger impact on the evaluation of politicians, explicit evaluation of politicians, because there are other studies regarding implicit, which are a bit different. It is strongly affected by in-group favoritism. So you overrate the morality of your own leader, of the leader on your side. But we also saw that some attacks, so given attacks, possibly indirect attacks against morality, are more effective than those against leadership. So morality is a very, in a way, fragile dimension, so it can be attacked if you attack it properly. They are effective, these attacks, despite in-group favoritism. They lead to a worse evaluation of the attacked politicians and to a better evaluation of the attack source, in this case a neutral source like a journalist. And the third point, as I told you, is the one on which we are still really working. Well, there is perhaps some trace of a third asymmetry, that is, effective defense strategies may vary according to the attack dimension. What we found was that downward counterfactual defense is effective in restoring both leadership and morality, but the upward counterfactual defense, sort of admitting that you were wrong, but because upward counterfactuals have I didn't tell you, have a very strong preparatory function. When you think about something better, well, you don't feel very well at the present time, but then you think, I could do better in the future. So probably people appreciate this when it has to do with morality. So upward counterfactual defense is very effective when you defend morality and restoring morality, but not in restoring leadership. So I think there is still a lot to do. Future research should further investigate, especially this third point of which defense strategies are more effective. I think it is worth the effort, though, because after all, communication does play a relevant role, not only in the perception of politicians, but more generally in impression formation. So I think it is worth going ahead with this line of research. Okay, thank you. Oh, yes. Any questions?
Thank you, Patrizia, for your presentation. I was wondering whether you checked for the possible role of valence in your results, because previous study shows that communal dimension is highly related to valence, more than agency and leadership. So I was wondering whether you balance your attacks on valence. Otherwise, an alternative explanation of the primacy of morality is that it is simply more negative. The attacks on morality are simply more negative than the attacks on leadership.
Sure. Yes, we are doing that because there is the possibility of checking the valency. We have this work by Andrea Bale and others. So we are varying this and taking into account this difference, because obviously if you speak of lying or other traits, they are more negative than others, and so we do that, yes. But we nevertheless find the same results, only with indirect attacks, though. So, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I asked myself whether you would be confident to give, for example, Berlusconi a recommendation what to do. So the background of my question is, I have the impression that in future research you need to consider a number of further moderators. So when Berlusconi, for example, came to power, I'm absolutely sure that his strategies to defend himself would vary, given the same kind of attack compared to the situation which he has to face now. So in any political debate, there is something like a structural or functional kind of self-presentation. And my question is, or my recommendation would be to bring this as an additional moderator in your kind of research. So to whom do I present my defense? Under which conditions are I expecting elections, for example, in the near future? Or can I be sure to be elected for 4 years? I assume, and I'm extremely confident, that this will vary in results.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I totally agree. I mean, in this case, the alleged politician was an incumbent one, obviously, but in reality, you must. There are many different phases, no, in your leading role, and then you may change according to this. But also, I think some other moderators which are very